Hello everyone, let's talk about reptiles today. Reptiles are ectothermic tetrapods whose body is protected by a dry, horny, often scaly skin. Their major innovation, which sets them apart from amphibia, is the amniotic egg, with its protective shell designed to hatch on dry land. In becoming independent of water for breeding purposes, they were able to spread over land to occupy new habitats. The egg, of course, requires internal fertilization. The embryo, as it develops within the shell, lies in a fluid-filled sac. It is connected to a large yolk, to water and protein, to a sac-enclosed waste disposal system, and through the porous shell to air. An ectotherm is an animal that maintains its body temperature by absorbing heat from the surrounding environment. They are often described as being cold-blooded and are unable to regulate their body temperature metabolically. All extant animals, except mammals and birds, exhibit poikilothermy. The passive variation in the internal body temperature of an animal, which depends on the temperature of the environment, and are described as ectotherms. Although unable to maintain a constant body temperature, they can respond to compensate for very low or very high temperatures. For example, the tissue composition can change to regulate the blood flow to peripheral tissues, and the animals can actively seek sun or shade. The outermost membrane of the egg is the chorion, which lies just beneath the porous shell. It allows exchange of respiratory gases but retains water. The amnion encases the developing embryo within a fluid-filled cavity. The yolk sac provides food from the yolk for the embryo via blood vessels connecting to the embryo's gut. The allantois surrounds a cavity into which waste products from the embryo are excreted. Amphibians breathe by squeezing their throat to pump air into their lungs. This limits their breathing capacity to the volume of their mouths. Reptiles developed pulmonary breathing, expanding and contracting the rib cage and diaphragm to suck air into the lungs and then force it out. The capacity of this system is limited only by the volume of the lungs. Reptilia provide a classic example of adaptive radiation. Initially scarce, they diverged to exploit and adapt to many different habitats, thereby becoming more successful and abundant. Living and most fossil reptiles are easily distinguished from amphibia by many skeletal details, especially in the skull. An important feature of reptile classification is the presence and number of openings behind the eyes. Reptiles' jaw muscles were anchored to these holes, which allowed them to bite more powerfully. The first group to rise to dominance were the synapsids, whose skulls had a hole behind the openings for the eyes. Pelycosaurs, the most primitive synapsids, were dominant for 50 million years and made up 70% of all land vertebrates. Permian forms were large. One of these, Dimetrodon, is notable for its long, sharp, stag-knife teeth and elongated spines projecting from its spinal column. These apparently supported a sail-like membrane, which was well supplied by blood vessels. This structure was probably a temperature-regulating device. Turned side-on to the sun would be net gain in heat to the body. Turned end-on, there would be a net loss. About 250 million years ago, pelycosaurs were replaced by another type of synapsids, the therapsids. The front teeth were reduced or lost, and in some, replaced by a horny beak with sharp cutting edges. Some evidence indicates that they may have been endotherms, able to produce heat internally, and perhaps even possessed hair. This would have permitted therapsids to be far more active than other vertebrates of that time, when winters were cold and long. For 20 million years, therapsids, also called mammal-like reptiles, were the dominant land vertebrate until they were largely replaced 230 million years ago by another group of reptiles, the diapsids. Most therapsids became extinct 170 million years ago, but one group survived and has living descendants today, the mammals. The pterosaurs, derived from therapsid carnivores in the late Permian, gave rise to progressive forms, the cynodonts, which, in the course of the Triassic, became increasingly mammal-like. Their teeth, in contrast to those of a typical reptile, which are alike, were differentiated for biting and chewing. The lower jaw, as in other reptiles, contained several bones on each side, but one, the dentary, was enlarged at the expense of the other bones. In mammals, the lower jaws consist of a dentary alone. Diapsids have skulls with 2 pairs of holes on each side of the head. A variety of different diapsids occurred in the Triassic period, but one group, the archosaurs, were of evolutionary significance because they gave rise to crocodiles, pterosaurs, dinosaurs, and birds. Among the early archosaurs were the largest animals the world had seen, up to that point, and the first land vertebrates to be bipedal, to stand and walk on 2 feet. Primitive forms in the late Permian and early Triassic times included carnivores with sharp, slightly recurved teeth setting sockets in the jaw. Some were confined to the Triassic. Another, the crocodile line, still survives today, the pterosaurs. The first flight specialists ranged to the end of the Cretaceous, as also did the dinosaurs. A further innovation resulted in the birds, an offshoot of the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were a highly varied group of archosaurs, which evolved erect posture and greatly improved their efficiency of gait. In the process, the limb structure was remodeled, the limbs were straightened and held in a vertical position under the body, and thus brought closer together. This allowed direct fore and aft limb motion and increased the length of stride. Speed of movement was furthered by placing not the whole hands and feet, but only the digits on the ground. While some dinosaurs were quadrupedal, walking on all fours, others were bipedal and walked on their hind legs. In these, the weight of body was pivoted on the pelvic girdle, which became fused to the spine, giving more rigid support. Dinosaur is a collective term for 2 separate orders, the Saurischia and the Ornithischia. They are distinguished by a variety of characters, including the nature of the pelvis. The Saurischean pelvis is a normal reptile type, and the Ornithischean pelvis resembles that of a bird. Both orders appeared in the Triassic, diversified, and existed in large numbers. The saurischians include bipedal carnivores, the theropoda, and quadrupedal herbivores, the sauropodomorpha. There are several different groups of theropods. For instance, the coelurosaurs ranged from quite small forms, like Compsognathus, which was about 65 centimeters long, up to 4 meters in length. Some of the largest terrestrial killers known to have existed were important in the Cretaceous. Tyrannosaurus, for instance, had a massive skull, over 1 meter in length, and its jaw held serrated, dagger-like teeth. The sauropods include not merely the largest dinosaurs, but also the largest known land animals. Some, it is estimated, may have weighed 80 tons. Typically, in the sauropods, the neck and tail were extremely long, and the body relatively short and bulky. They have stout, columnar legs with short-toed feet rather like an elephant's. The vertebrae, while massive, had hollow spaces which reduced the weight without losing structural strength. The skull was small and the brain capacity unusually small. The ornithischians were herbivores with a unique, single bone forming the tip of the lower jaw. Typically, the jaws were toothless in front and probably horn-covered, while at the back they were equipped with a great battery of grinding teeth. Ornithischians were highly varied and included the stegosaurs and the ankylosaurs. Stegosaurus was about 6 meters in length. It had 2 rows of large, triangular, bony plates around the backbone and paired spikes on its tail. The plates bear traces of numerous blood vessels. This implies they possibly acted as a heat exchange device. The ankylosaurs are mainly Cretaceous forms. They were heavily armored with bony plates, often spinous. All dinosaurs, except their bird descendants, became extinct 65 million years ago, apparently as a result of an asteroid impact. The circulatory system of reptiles is an improvement over that of fish and amphibians, providing oxygen to the body more efficiently. The improvement is achieved by extending the septum within the heart from the atrium pathway across the ventricle. This septum creates a partial wall that tends to lessen mixing of oxygen-poor blood with oxygen-rich blood within the ventricle. In crocodiles, the septum completely divides the ventricle, creating a 4-chambered heart, just as it does in birds and mammals, and probably did in dinosaurs. Reptilia, the traditional version, is paraphyletic because it excludes birds. On the other hand, Sauropsida of phylogenetic interest is monophyletic. Following the traditional version, keeping in mind that birds will be discussed in due course, the 4 surviving orders of reptiles contain about 7,000 species. Reptiles occur worldwide except in the coldest regions, where it is impossible for ectotherms to survive. Reptiles are among the most numerous and diverse of terrestrial vertebrates. The order Chelonia consists of turtles, tortoises, and terrapins. Turtles and tortoises lack teeth but have sharp beaks. They differ from all other reptiles because their bodies are encased within a protective shell. Many of them can pull their head and legs into the shell as well. for total protection from predators. Chelonians appeared in the Upper Triassic, and their essential structures have changed little since then. The earliest were land-living, but aquatic forms soon developed, and they diversified in the early Cretaceous to become widespread. Today, the order Rhynchocephalia contains a single species, the Tuatara, a large lizard-like animal about half a meter long. The limited diversity of modern Rhynchocephalians belies their rich evolutionary past. In the Triassic period, Rhynchocephalians experienced a great adaptive radiation, producing many species that differed greatly in size and habitat. Rhynchocephalians are the closest relatives of snakes and lizards, with whom they form the group Lepidosauria. The order Squamata includes lizards and snakes. Changes to the morphology of the head and jaws allow greater strength and mobility. These improvements in jaw design have made a major contribution to their evolutionary success. Snakes, which evolved from a lizard ancestor, are characterized by the lack of limbs, movable eyelids, and external ears, as well as a great number of vertebrae, sometimes more than 300. Limblessness has evolved more than a dozen times in lizards. Of the 13 families of snakes, only 4 contain venomous species. The order Crocodilia is composed of 25 species of large, primarily aquatic reptiles. Although all crocodilians are fairly similar in appearance today, much greater diversity existed in the past, including species that were entirely terrestrial and others that achieved a total length in excess of 15 meters. All crocodilians are carnivores. They generally hunt by stealth, waiting in ambush for prey, and then attacking ferociously. Their bodies are adapted for this form of hunting, with eyes on top of their heads and their nostrils on top of their snouts, so they can see and breathe while lying quietly submerged in water. They have enormous mouths, studded with sharp teeth, and extraordinarily strong necks. A valve in the back of the mouth prevents water from entering the air passage when a crocodilian feeds underwater. Based on the broader snout of fully grown Sarcosuchus, when compared to narrow-snouted crocodiles, along with the lack of interlocking of the smooth and sturdy crowned teeth when the jaws were closed. Sarcosuchus had a generalized diet similar to that of the Nile crocodile, which would have included large terrestrial prey, such as the abundant dinosaurs that lived in the same region. In many ways, crocodiles resemble birds far more than they do other living reptiles. For example, crocodiles build nests and care for their young, and they have a 4-chambered heart, as birds do. Why are crocodiles more similar to birds than to other living reptiles? Most biologists agree that birds are in fact the direct descendants of dinosaurs. Both crocodiles and birds are more closely related to dinosaurs and to each other than they are to lizards and snakes. Reptiles have a hard, scaly skin that minimizes water loss, thoracic breathing, and an enclosed amniotic egg that does not need to be laid in water. Synapsids had a single hole in the skull behind the eyes and included ancestors of mammals. Diapsids had 2 holes and are ancestors of modern reptiles and birds. The 4 living orders of reptiles include the turtles and tortoises, tortoises, lizards, and snakes and crocodiles. That is all for this lecture. Thanks for watching. See you next time.